Hello, this is Inside the Press Box with Sunil Sunder Raj of the Everyday Fan Sports. Today, I have the incredible honor and privilege of speaking with Beth Gardner, author of One Rowing Stroke at a Time, Surviving Stage 3 Breast Cancer. There you go. Beth, thank you so much for the opportunity. It is just a true pleasure being able to speak with you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Beth, before we get to the book, I wanted to first start with I said you being on the rowing team at Drexel University, joining that in your senior year there. I said I know it's been been a long time, but the fact that I think it's so inspirational because the fact that you decided to, as said, take up a sport. Just talk about the process. What led to that decision, and just you know the rowing, and talking to a former athlete, or a current athlete, it's such a mental and physically, rigorous sport. But just dive into and just talk about it.
Sure. Well, I'll just preface by saying I was fortunate throughout my life, starting at the age of 7 or 8, to get involved in organized sports.
Mm-hmm.
And then before that, age of 5, I got involved in taking dance lessons, which for me was really the foundation that helped me in any sport that I got into. And I, in fact, encourage all my friends that have children, boys or girls, get them involved in ballet or jazz, tap. I got involved in tap. But that really helped me with the foundation of sort of understanding my core, my balance. When I went through growth spurts, I still was able to readjust somewhat quickly. So that was a foundation. So just know all of that was kind of going on throughout my life. I played softball, basketball, volleyball. I ran track. And then on my own, I always ran distance. I have an older sister who was in distance running, and that's sort of what intrigued me. But I also just loved the idea of putting music in my ears and just taking off and running. It was almost like another form of dance for me. So because I had built that endurance over the years, starting in 9th grade, I had a base level unknowing to me that worked well and helped me to transition into the sport of rowing. So how did I discover rowing? I was working at Stone Harbor, New Jersey one summer. I was waitressing, and I was working at a retail store called Somersault that sold sweatshirts and t-shirts right on 96th Street in Stone Harbor. And at the time, I was living there the whole summer, and people would see me running, and they would say, "Do you do crew?" And at that period of time, rowing was not going on in Pittsburgh. In fact, I didn't know what it was. As a matter of fact, we didn't have lacrosse, and we didn't have field hockey. There were a number of sports that we hadn't yet attracted. So I did not honestly know what they were talking about. I thought they meant J. Crew, honest to God. So when I went to Drexel that year after the summer, I literally started seeing signs all over the campus for join crew, come down to the boathouse, call this number, join crew. So I called the number after literally seeing the signs, right, from the universe. And I talked to a gentleman by the name of Matt Bailey at the time, and he said, contact Jessica Tigas. Her name now is Jessica Cardwell, but she lived actually in the dorm I was in. And I contacted her and ran down with her from Drexel University's campus, which is on West Philly, right across Market Street from the University of Pennsylvania. So we ran down across Girard Bridge down to Boathouse Row, and I had my first practice. Now, I come from a family, it's in the DNA, we love water, oceans, rivers, streams, going through the woods, seeing streams. We just love the water. It's natural for me to be gravitating toward it. My father was in the Navy. He had a sailboat that he used in his free time. So that being said, I was naturally drawn to the water, but it was that was really what attracted me. It was being on the water. I was naive. Oh, we're going to go out in the afternoons. We're going to do some nice calm rowing. It'll be relaxing after taking courses. I didn't know the intensity of it. I didn't know things that were required of it. So that being said, I fell in love with it and just continued going, and did not know that, again, that all the running I had been doing that I just passionately enjoyed doing
Yeah.
would help me with the endurance aspect of rowing. Now, with that being said, from my own observation of people that got involved in the sport, many of them in high school or throughout life had been swimmers. Swimming was another fantastic endurance sport that allowed for an athlete to transition easily into the sport of rowing because they already had the endurance.
Hmm.
Incredible endurance, I might say.
Yeah.
Swimming is such a wonderful activity, but the lung capacity that it creates is you just can't. Any other sport, you just can't match it.
Yeah.
So that's how I found it. That's how I discovered it, and I had the opportunity to get involved in the sport during my senior year. I
Mhm.
had chosen after high school to not get involved in any more organized sports.
Okay.
So I did continue to run at my leisure. Again, just putting music in my ears and going for a run, even if it means I have to run for, very briskly through West Philadelphia. I just did it because I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But I had had so much in high school of organized sports, my whole life had been revolving around it, that I just needed a break.
Yeah. You know, I said I talked to interviewed an athlete, and they would talk about how much the intensity of their training. This athlete said waking up at 6 a.m., going down to the boathouse, training for 2 hours. Then they would eat lunch. Then they would go lift with the coach on the rowing machine. They would get two practice sessions every single day, except for Sunday and Thursday. Just talk about on the, just here, at Drexel, just in terms of the training, for rowing.
Well, for me at Drexel, it was not that intense. It was an
Okay.
afternoon.
Okay.
Occasionally, closer to the actual season, we did have a morning practice, but it
Okay.
was not that rigorous. It wasn't until I graduated Drexel and entered into participating in the sport more on a
Yeah.
full time basis that I got involved in extremely rigorous activity. And again, I
Mhm.
was completely naive to what was going to take place.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask you. 1994, invited to what is it, the national team? I think pre-elite U.S. national rowing camp before graduation there at Drexel. If you want to talk about that, and interesting stories that I know you had indicated that your mom mailed you your degree there in psychology and food science slash nutrition with a minor in dietitian. And the fact that you graduated in 3 years, which was just, remarkable. Just talk about that, Beth.
Sure. Well, I self funded my education. So I chose Drexel because they have the co op system, which meant I could work and actually build a resume
Hmm.
during that time period. So I was fortunate enough to get a 6-month contract at Moss Rehabilitation Center in
Yeah.
the brain injury department, where I worked in outpatient. And I got the experience of working with, we called them clients, after they had been through the hospital visits. So, they might have had a stroke, a motorcycle accident, car accident, a wide range of areas where they'd unfortunately been brain damaged. So I
Hmm.
did that. And I also waitressed at bartended my way through at a high end restaurant that's no longer there, but it was called the Striped Bass right near
Hmm.
Rittenhouse Square. But anyway, my coach at the time during that year, her name is Mamie Doyle. Her maiden name is Galloway. She had recommended to me that I submit my rowing score and weightlifting scores, these basic scores that are required by the national team governing body at the time. I don't know how it works now, but she
Hmm.
wanted me to submit them just to see where I stood compared to other athletes that were already involved in it. Because at the time I was of the size of a rower. I went actually through a growth spurt during my Drexel year. I grew 2 more inches, and I finally filled out.
Okay.
So she submitted my scores. It was a rowing score, there was a weightlifting score, and there may have been some other tests that she had me do. Submitted the scores, and I ended up getting invited to what was called a pre-elite rowing camp.
Okay.
And at that time, it was at the women's sweep camp. So sweeping is with one oar. And during that time, it was located in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it was under Hartmut Bushbacher. So I went there and just thought it was going to be a summer camp. Graduate, because Drexel University is a term system, their semester starts in the fall in mid-September. So graduation, of course, doesn't come till mid-January, June. So I told the psych department, just mail my mom my diploma and she can have it. Because at the end of the day, it's really, you're kind of getting it for the parents anyway. Yeah. Yes, you might want to move on to get a master's degree, law degree, or go into medicine. But at the time I was like, you know what, I really don't want to stand outside in the sweltering heat of Philadelphia to wait for a diploma. I'll just send it to her. And also my professors at the time encouraged it. They said, just go. So I went. And that's when I not fell in love with it at a deeper level. That's when I started to get exposed to the rigorous training where you're training 2 hours in the morning, you have a break midday, and then you're training 2 hours in the afternoon. But then as the years continued, and as I was allowed to train under other national team coaches, such as the late Igor Grinko, he is from the Ukraine, and then the late Ted Allison Nash, and he trained at a Penny C along Boathouse Row in Philadelphia. When I got more involved with training with Olympians, people that had already been to the Olympics, people that had been training or were involved in the sport, some since high school, that's when the rigorous training increased all the more. And so, for example, I got invited one year to a winter training camp in Colorado Springs, and I can clearly remember, and I still have the journals of it, you know, there'd be a morning of 4 hours of weightlifting under Igor Grinko. We'd have lunch, we'd come back and do a 2-hour abbreviated section of that weightlifting segment that we just did. And then we would go to the pool, and we would literally have to swim for 60 minutes. It wasn't like you could just wade in the water or soak. You had to swim, and sometimes he would throw in a competition among us. So, and that was just one day. And then we trained as many as, 5, I'm going to say 5.5 days a week. So there were certain days we had a full day off, and then we would also have a half of a day off. But regardless, it was still intense. Yeah,
I was just about to say that word. So you rode from 1994 until 1999. So just talk about, 1999. It said, basically it said that was you completed, or finished, it said rowing on a competitive basis. Just talk about that last year, Beth.
Sure. So that last year I had felt overtrained all the time. And by overtrain, I mean, we were trained to use our heart rate monitors when we get up in the morning to immediately check our heart rate. Where's our resting heart rate at? And mine was always close to 100, if not over. So I was overtrained. My performance had depleted drastically. And I just assumed it was maybe the universe telling me it was time to, hang up the oars. I had yet to earn a berth on the national team. And to be quite honest, because I was 28, turning 29 at the time, and approaching that 30-year mark, I didn't want to waste another 4 years trying to train and try to make the team at that point. Forget about the Olympics. I just didn't want to put the energy in anymore because it was very intense, short, lustrous, and intense. So with that being said, December of 99, I went to what was my last informal racing event. We had informal racing events throughout the year called speed orders, and that's where we were allowed to show up and compete against one another. And the races would simulate similar to that would take place at a national championship, but they are informal. So you can gauge where you're at, and that way the coaches can see where you're at too. get an idea of who might be a prospect for the world's team or not. And so I was in the C final. The previous year I had been in the A final. So that was a sign. But also the time that I was sitting at the starting line of the last race, I remember hearing a voice. And first I thought it was just through my gut, but later on I realized, it was really a higher power saying to me, this is going to be your last race. You need to stop. And so I finished that race, packed up my boat, loaded it on my Volkswagen Fox two-door car that I had at the time, and then drove back to Philadelphia. And during that time, there was, as I talk about it in the book, there was an ongoing rainstorm to the point that I lost a windshield wiper. So if that wasn't setting the stage for what I was about to go into, and again, not knowing it, I mean, the universe sends you signs, and I wholeheartedly believe it because I've seen them. So that's when I decided to, thank God, stop. And I'm glad I did, because had I not, I may not be here today. It's that cut clear.
No, definitely. So I wanted to ask you, before we talk about the book, started out as a consultant in marketing, copywriting, PR communications, and event management. Just talk about that, and then of course we can, discuss, your book as well, Beth.
Sure. So I didn't set out to follow a dual career path. It just kind of worked out that way. So I worked full-time in the investment industry, but because of having been diagnosed with cancer, having gone through the treatments all in 2001, wanted to give back. So I did have an opportunity to coach at a bachelor's barge club in Philadelphia along Boathouse Row. But I also had an opportunity to be co-founder for the Row for the Cure chapter in Philadelphia. So I teamed up with a woman by the name of Nancy Hamilton, who was also a survivor. And we literally built that race from the ground up. Everything, including the pre-race dinner the night before, where we had a silent auction, entertainment, and everything. So that was my first sort of real experience in event planning and all the aspects that are involved in it, along with PR and communications. While I had done a little bit of it and dabbled in it in the investment industry, it was the nonprofit industry that really gave me that experience. Allowed me to get my feet wet.
One of the this is what you tell the nonprofit, being consulted for St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. Can you just talk? I just that really stood out to me. If you want to talk about that, Beth.
Well, one of my obvious my questions I had to myself, but it's more of on an empathetic level, is what the parents must go through when having a child go through cancer or any type of illness. So I researched them online, and there is an actual chapter here in Pittsburgh where I helped out with a gala that took place at the Omni Hotel right in center city of Pittsburgh, and helped just with the PR aspect of that. But again, what drew me to it is the fact of having done the research of how St. Jude, the parents don't have to pay a dime. And for someone like myself, who literally had to be the CEO, CFO, and COO of that journey, I just was amazed that there was a hospital that was able to take care of all that funding, because it's enormous. I mean, even with the outstanding insurance that I had, the Blue Cross Blue Shield in Philadelphia, I still had $30,000 of debt that the insurance didn't cover. And keep this in mind, I was only $10,000 in debt when I graduated Drexel, and I paid that off within a year. So $30,000 for me it created anxiety. It was made me think about, do I choose my credit line or I focus on my lifeline? What am I worried about here? So the fact, again, that St. Jude pays for everything, and so the parent removes that whole area where it creates tremendous anxiety is huge, and that's why I applaud them for that, because it's an enormous undertaking. Cancer is an expensive disease to have. even with outstanding insurance, which I did.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, let's of course talk about the book, but just it said you're being diagnosed with breast cancer. It said battling this. I mean, it said 20 years. I mean, ago, but cancer free for the last 5 years. I mean, just if you want to, it said explain to people just out there who are going to listen to this about your story, Beth.
Sure. So it threw me into a tailspin, obviously,
Yeah.
when I had retired and had been working full time 1 year after retiring from the sport in December of '99. And it was at that time, it was 1 month after my 30th birthday. And 3 weeks before I was going to run my first marathon that I was diagnosed with a stage 3.
Okay.
Now, just to keep things in perspective, I had gone back to running and decided I would do one and only marathon. And so I chose the Philadelphia Marathon. It was up to 15 miles comfortably at that time. So although I still had 26 miles to complete, although I was supposed to hit that inevitable wall, whatever that was supposed to feel like, I was willing to deal with that and finish that marathon. My goal was to finish that marathon in 3 hours and 15 minutes, regardless of if I qualified for the Boston Marathon or not. I just wanted the experience. But unfortunately, I couldn't run the marathon. My breast surgeon from Pennsylvania Hospital in Old City, Philadelphia, instructed me to get a lumpectomy and do it as soon as possible. So within a week, I had a lumpectomy. And then after 3 weeks of that, I started my first round of chemotherapy, having in total 12 rounds of chemotherapy and then 6 weeks of radiation after. And again, all of that treatment took place at Pennsylvania Hospital.
Just talk about, I mean, battling through the ups and downs, the twists and turns. I mean, it really puts life into perspective. I mean, when you're really in the battle of your life here, said, and undergoing, surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, it really takes its toll. I mean, both mentally and physically, but just, can you describe, is it just, I mean, what you went through, Beth?
Sure. Well, fortunately, once again, rowing, my years of being an athlete really prepared me for that journey. That conditioning level I was in, I could not have been in a better condition physically to have been able to withstand those 12 chemotherapy treatments. And I was fortunate, I think, because of being an athlete, because of having been coached by top level US national team coaches, and also from having been surrounded by these extraordinary athletes who are now living dynamic lives. Some of them were training and going to medical school, or training and going to law school, or getting their MBA. So high achieving individuals with a clear focus on having a purpose in life and doing something with it. So because of that entire environment, it helped me mentally to set the stage for what I was about to do, which was the race of my life. It's interesting, all these medals that you're striving to earn, and you're collecting them race after race, season after season. None of that mattered anymore. The fact that I had never earned a berth on the national team for the U.S. didn't matter, because this was a final only race I was involved in, and that was going through cancer treatments and trying to survive. But in addition to that, I had my chemotherapy on Saturdays because I worked during the day. So during the week. So I would have it on Saturday. It would allow me to rest Saturday afternoon through Sunday, and then get back into the seat of my job and work full time. So that was good for me because it provided a distraction. All right. I am someone that does actually enjoy working. So for me, that was therapeutic for me, because it took my mind off of what was going on. And unfortunately, again, because of that physical conditioning, and I can't emphasize it enough, the endurance level helped me to endure the actual chemotherapy. So it wasn't until the last 3 sessions of chemo that I had that I started to feel tired and sluggish. but I already knew what it felt like to be overtrained. I had been overtrained and overworked for almost 5 years of my life. So it was the norm mentally that I had. Plus, all of the psychological lessons you learn from racing, the mental games you can play with yourself to push yourself down that race course, deal with the lactic acid pain, and get through that finish line to the best of your ability, as quickly as you can. That paid off. I can remember back in Colorado Springs, Igor Grinko had us climb Pikes Peak every week. So it was 3 weeks there. So 3 times we would climb. And as you're training in altitude to begin with, but as you're getting to the top of that 14,000-foot mountain, allowing us to go as high as we could go, at some point in time, I kept thinking to myself, all I could think was left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. I was losing the ability to concentrate on what my body was doing. Even with music in my ears to provide me that motivation, similar to when I would go running. That training really helped me. So, it was a challenge. It was also an interesting challenge to see my body change, because I, again, was training for that marathon. So anyone training for a marathon, regardless of your body type, you're going to have a low body fat. And I know I was around 12 at that point. But my body, within 1 month period of time, I went from literally a size 12, which was an average size clothing for me, all the way up to a 1X. And while it's not the numbers that matter, I'm one of those females that could care less about the number. It was just the number of sizes that changed. It could have been from a size 0 to a size 8. It doesn't matter the size number. It was just sort of the large jump within a short amount of time. So all of that muscle mass was turning to slush. And I was just nothing but felt like a body of fat.
Yeah.
It was just really uncomfortable to change to that level. I just swelled up. At some point, someone asked me if I was pregnant, and I wasn't. So that's sort of the appearance I had. And then I didn't care about losing hair. Again, I'm an athlete to the core. The only time I'm worried about hair is if it's getting in my eyes, and God forbid it goes in between my contact lenses. I don't worry about hair. So I wasn't bothered about losing hair. But yeah, it was a challenge. And then again, I had to financially manage it, handle all the insurance and how insurance works. So I really had to endure the whole experience of that. But fortunately, having self-funded my education at Drexel, having been taught to be self-reliant all my life, it came somewhat easier for me.
That's great. So let's talk about, what led to you writing this book. You said surviving stage 3 breast cancer.
Sure. So it started out as a journal. I had no intention of actually writing a book, but the oncologist nurses at Penn Hospital said, you should journal if you get a chance. And I thought, that's a great idea. I journaled all of my workouts through rowing. Why not journal this? So I started journaling, and then it was within less than a year that I realized I had potential for a book. So on the side, when I wasn't working full time during my remission period, I wrote the book. I had a friend at the time review it. She had graduated from the University of Penn and had studied journalism as well as American Lit. So I trusted her in terms of making sure it was grammarly spot on. But I also knew to not publish it when I finished it in 2004. And the reason why, well, first of all, I hadn't reached the 5-year remission mark, so I didn't want to jinx myself. But also, most importantly, I hadn't gained the pearls of wisdom that I've extracted and included within this book. The wisdom, the spiritual wisdom and emotional wisdom that you gain from going through something like that. So I was going to publish it 2010, but with the downfall of the market and having been in the investment industry myself, it was too much. And in fact, I'd forgotten about the book. So it wasn't until we had lockdown here in Pittsburgh, which was the last week in March 2020
Hmm.
that I thought to myself, maybe I should pull out that manuscript and consider publishing it, because I couldn't understand during the pandemic. Once I researched pandemic and grew to understand what we were up against, how anyone with cancer was going to get treatment, let alone want to survive, have the will to survive. How are they going to have the will to survive through this?
Hmm.
It was a lot for me to get through it. And believe me, once you go through the treatment, you know, you're still under a lot of anxiety. They're in the back burner of your mind because you're in fear of recurrence. You
Yeah.
know, when you're done treatment, regardless of how many different treatments you have, then you're playing what I call the recurrence game, right? Which I viewed as yet another sport. I viewed getting treatment like a sport, and then I viewed the recurrence game, and I said, well, I'm not going to get it back. So how am I going to do that? So I actually, during that period of time to prevent recurrence, did a deep dive, psych, reading psych books, reading metaphysics books to figure out how I attracted a non-hereditary form of disease. It does not run in our gene pool. I searched the Irish side, the Northern Irish side. I searched the Swedish side, Scandinavian side, and we don't have that in the gene pool. We've got other things, notably like large frames, large bone structure, ability to build muscle mass, but we didn't have that. So I wanted to understand how I attracted that. And so
Hmm.
that's a lot of what this book talks about, is me discovering what I needed to do personally, to pull out what were basically emotionally toxic roots that were embedded, within me, caused from basically burning the candle at both ends for too long in life, being an overachiever for too many years in life. That's really a lot of what attracted my body from creating this cancer. So I spent the time, again, when I wasn't at work, when I wasn't doing nonprofit work, researching, going to a library. I love a library, to understand the metaphysics of and also biology, understanding the biology of how this actually surfaced.
Hmm.
And so one mission I have from this book, aside from talking about the sport of rowing,
Yeah.
is to advocate to other people that there, in addition to receiving treatment, it would be wise to seek out professional help, whether it's through a psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker, but also do research to find out why you have that specific cancer you have. And one of the books I came across during that journey was by the late Louise Hay. And she wrote a book that's called You Can Heal Your Life. And basically, her book is divided out and explaining why people get different forms of different diseases. And breast cancer is associating with nurturing, right? The human breasts for women are associated with nurturing. So the lack of nurturing can cause toxicity within that area, which basically stemmed to my problem. But that's really what I did, was in an effort to beat that reoccurrence, not just 5 years, but 10 years, because I had stage 3. I was basically knocking on stage 4's door,
Hmm.
right? I knew the statistics. I had not only heard them from my oncologist, but I did my own research. I'm very resourceful. So I knew what I was up against. I knew this was a final only race, and I was determined to beat it. And fortunately, I'm now 21 years free. And I mean, there's no chance of it coming back at this point, but I just consider myself extremely lucky to, number one, hear the signs from the universe saying, stop rowing. Because had I continued for until 2004 and tried to at least earn a berth, then I may not be here today. That tumor
Hmm.
would have grown to stage 4 and probably metastasized. But also for people to understand that get your treatments, whatever they are, but also do the emotional work. And an example of doing the emotional work is there are a lot of addicts, for example, in the North American continent. And in just America alone, there are so many rehabilitation centers throughout where people that unfortunately suffer from addiction can go somewhere that's confidential, that's private, that's quiet, that's healing,
Hmm.
and find out and actually break the addiction process. And so basically what I was doing was was breaking the reoccurrence process. Well, I don't suffer from addiction. I just took it as that sort of mindset that I need to break this reoccurrence.
Mhm.
I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to break it, and do whatever it takes. And while this book, I realize, looks very thin, that's because it's power packed, sentence by sentence, with key information.
Yeah.
I'm not wasting time didn't want to put a lot of filler in the book. It's all straight to the point, with resources as well.
Yeah, no, it's terrific. Hey, what's critical as well, Beth, is having a strong support system. I know there are a bunch of people that you wanted to, of course, we mentioned that really, I think, aided and, helped you, said with, battling, stage 3 breast cancer. Uh, Family here, I think Mukesh, Sheila, Rajiv, and Vic Pant from Haldwani, India. If you want to talk about them first, and I know you mentioned as well before we came in on the air, your late brother Todd, who you drew inspiration from, who was born with cerebral palsy, one functioning lung, and one of the, as you mentioned, one of the influential reasons why you decided to fight this disease, as you said, relentlessly. Just if you want to talk about them, first.
Sure. So, what I realized, and of course I talk about within the book, is that the universe is so amazing that long before you even understand why someone's in your path in life, God will put that person there without you even putting two and two together. Why are they here? And you may think it's for one reason, but sometimes there's even a bigger reason that you're not even aware of. So an example of that would obviously be my brother, born in 64, cerebral palsy. In 88, his left lung collapsed, leaving him with only one functioning lung. He had a nebulizer that he used on a daily basis. He was highly susceptible, obviously, to getting colds. This pandemic was a nightmare for me,
Yeah.
trying to protect him, because he would have ended up in a hospital connected to tubes and we wouldn't have been able to say goodbye. So having watched him go through a number of struggles, he wore in high school a Milwaukee back brace. Throughout his life, he wore leg braces, very similar to the ones Forrest Gump wore when he was a child at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
So having watched him throughout life battle his challenges, he was also diagnosed with slight mental retardation. His IQ was a little bit lower. He had a speech impairment. So what I came to realize when I was going through the treatments alone was my one bad day when I was having chemotherapy, was equivalent to his everyday in life. So he really set the bar for me, for my mentality of, you know what, suck it up, Beth, and just go through it. Because my bad day is nothing like his everyday in life. I just had 12 rounds of chemotherapy. I can do that. I'll be done in 6 months with treatment. So that was the perspective I had on all of it. In addition to, all the training I had in sports. So he was extremely instrumental for me to persevere. I'm going to beat this. My parents are not going to be burying a child. I don't want my brother at my funeral or my sister at my funeral. So he was instrumental. Two other people that were instrumental, both have the same name, Jessica. Jessica Cardwell worked at University of Penn at the Abramson Cancer Center at the time. Now, I had interviewed 3 different surgeons, but Jessica had suggested I meet a specific surgeon, Dr. Dalia Sadaloff at Penn Hospital in Old City. And the moment I met Dalia, again, my intuition kicked in. Again, the universe said to me, that's the one you want. Again, do you know what it's like to shop for a surgeon? It's anxiety provoking, especially when you hadn't planned on doing it. This wasn't, a pre-arranged surgery I was planning to have at some point in time in life. This came on an instant. So Jessica Cardwell was instrumental. we had met each other at Drexel. We'd rode together at Drexel, and we've kept in touch since. So she was put in my life, I believe, by God to direct me to get the right care. Then there's Jessica Grossnickel, and I had met her, of course, on Boathouse Row as well. And she and her mother were instrumental in helping me emotionally get through that period of time where, in fact, her mother, Susan Roberts, drove me to Penn Hospital the day of surgery before she went to work. She went out of her way to do that, which was very helpful. And she was always calling, "How are you doing? Do you need anything?" And Jessica was as well. So God put them in my life also. And then in addition to that, I had been working prior to all of this, the retirement of rowing. I had met with a professional by the name of Rajiv Pant. He is a CTO and has been for a number of the um, big name newspaper as well as magazine publications in the United States. And I had met him when I worked at Philly.com. And he and I became friends. And then I, of course, through him, then met his brother, Vic Pant, who now lives in Toronto. He's a PhD and is also involved in the IT industry. And their parents would fly from Haldwani, India, which is roughly an hour from New Delhi, and to visit their sons every 6 months. So they would be in the US for 6 months to go back to India and coming back. So I got to know them as well. But it was quite clear to me that God had brought them into my life as well, to be a support system, an extended family, and helping me heal. So my point in all that was the fact that, it's completely awesome. It's mind blowing how God can know well in advance, several years in advance, that I'm going to need a specific person in my life or a group of people that are going to have the traits that are going to help me to achieve the next goal. And he will send, meaning the universe, God will send people that, are not necessarily from your same background, from your same religion, from the same area of the world. And I think that holds true too. And I do point that out in the book, is how there will be people put into your life that it will seem odd. They're so far in right field that they've come in, and you're completely opposites of one another from many areas, from your background, maybe even the languages you speak, your religious beliefs, but at the same time, they're put in to be instrumental. And that to me is just how awesome the universe is.
Two other people I want to mention, I think Susie Jure, if I'm mispronouncing your name, I apologize, who you known since seventh grade, and also your niece, is said Nicole Ducray. If you want to just talk about that.
Yeah, so Susie, I had known, Susie Drury, I had known since I was in seventh grade. So age 12, 13, and she and I have been lifelong friends. So she was also instrumental in terms of just keeping in contact with me. It's one thing, people have asked me, what's the best thing to do for people that are going through treatment? And I'm like, run an errand for them to the grocery store, to the pharmacy, buy them a gift certificate for a massage, or just call them and say, "Hey, how you doing?" Or just sit and be with them. Kind of like a dog or a cat will just sit and be with you. That alone, in addition to prayer, it does volumes in helping someone. So Susie has always been a steadfast friend in my life. And then, of course, when I was diagnosed, what's interesting is the day I was diagnosed, it was the same day my sister found out she was pregnant, and they weren't trying. And she was 40 years of age. So I knew that was another sign from the universe. So knowing that my sister was going to give birth to my niece also motivated me. Got to keep going. I got a niece coming into my life. I want to be part of her life. So that was also a reason for me to be resilient and persevere.
Hey, Beth, before you get the last word here, I was wondering what your advice would be, not only for maybe younger kids and athletes out there, but also people, I think, who are battling, serious illnesses, especially cancer out there?
So the bottom line is be kind to yourself and listen to your body. We didn't get into the situation haphazardly. There's always a reason that it's happened. And so I encourage people to say, get Louise Hay's book, Healing Yourself, or, do research into whatever disease you have to try to understand the underlying cause and the reason you've got it, the psychological cause, the biological reason, the chemical reason that you have it, because a lot of times that's where the ultimate healing stems from. The power of prayer, regardless of your religion. I grew up in an area in a community that was predominantly Jewish, 90% Jewish, but I went to a Protestant church. But at the same time, I was exposed to Orthodox Greek, Hindu, and Buddhism. So I believe that regardless of your religion, it's important to be spiritually fed, however you choose to do it. Be spiritually fed, meditate, connect with the higher power, to guide you through healing, and listen for the cues. Pay attention to the cues. I had known by that stage of life to pay attention to signs God sent me. I was fortunate enough to have learned that early on in life, having benefited from, growing up in a predominantly Jewish community, then growing up in a Christian home, and then exposed to all the other religions. And I do include a wide range of scripture here. It's not just from the Bible. I mean, even Native American scripture I put in there. So that's the point. Pay attention to the signs and listen to your body. When you need to rest, you need to rest. Now, I grew up in an atmosphere and had been living a life where rest was never a priority. The mindset was, you will rest when you die. And that's what I was told. So just go, do, achieve. Very highly driven atmosphere in all areas of my life. And because of that lack of rest, my body was breaking down at a very young age. Mm-hmm. I mean, by that stage, I should have been thinking about marriage and children and yada, 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 being Generation X. But so that's paramount, I believe.
Okay, Beth, you get the final word here. Message, for family, friends, former classmates, teammates, Drexel University, the medical team that you have. I want to give you the floor. Said it's well deserved. You're again such an inspiration and role model, for people out there. So I give you the floor.
Oh, sure. Well, I want to also thank the Amazon publishing team. I had been involved in self-publishing before with CFPs. For them, not for me. So Alex Roy, as well as Mike Davidson at Amazon Publishing, and the entire team helped me with this book. Originally, the cover I wanted was basically a collage of all the people that were involved in helping me. Mm-hmm. I didn't want myself on it. In fact, I instructed the picture on the back to be very small. This is not an ego-driven book. Yeah. It's not like me to even want myself on the cover. I was going to advocate to put the family dog that was with me throughout the journey, Toby. There he is with my brother. Put him in the cover, because a dog's with you the whole time. So I'd like to thank the Amazon publishing team, as well as all of my friends that I previously mentioned, for their support, because without them, who knows? Yeah. I may be 6 feet under.
Hey, Beth, again, incredible honor, privilege being able to interview you. Congrats, is said, on the book again, One Rowing Stroke at a Time, Surviving Stage 3 Breast Cancer. Wishing you not only continued success, but also good health as well.
Thank you. You as well. Thanks again for the time.